Living in Australia as a kid is strange. You get all the American and British media, television and books. We watch the same shows, and in a lot of ways share the same culture. But none of that belongs here in Australia. It all feels out of place. Christmas specials always reminded me of that. It's always snowing on television at Christmas time, and I'm watching kids build snowmen and families wear those tacky patterned jumpers, while I'm melting in the middle of a blistering Australian summer just trying to stay conscious in the heat. I guess we have a lot of the same urban legends too. The same scary stories and monsters. They travel here one way or another. Serial killer hitchhikers, werewolves, vampires, all that. But they don't really belong in Australia. I don't know if you've ever seen the Australian landscape, but it's nothing like the forests or plains you get in Europe or the States. For a start, we call forested parts here the bush. The name is bloody appropriate too. A eucalyptus forest is hard going for hikers. The undergrowth is thick and scraggly everywhere, other than the paths that have been worn by bushwalkers or animals. If you want to go off the path, well, imagine walking through a hedge filled with thorns and barbs. Now add the very high likelihood of spiders, which aren't like the pissy little ones you guys get. Big fat spiders with thick ropey webs that tangle around your face and neck if you aren't watching. Then there's the risk of snakes, or more dangerous, unseen ledges or cliffs. The whole thing is a huge pain in the arse. Your monsters wouldn't fit in here. It's hard to imagine being chased through the woods by a werewolf, when anything bigger than a rabbit has to keep to the paths or find itself tangled up in lantana. But most white kids don't actually learn much about the old Aboriginal stories. The things which live out in the bush, or those big red deserts. I think about that a lot now, particularly after living alone in a place called Blackheath in the Blue Mountains. It's not far from Sydney, the city with the big pretty bridge. My curiosity was nothing more until recently. Recently, things got pretty rough out there on my own. Living alone can really screw with your head. Most nights I like to sit out on the deck until late reading and writing while I have a smoke. I have a floodlight out there, but it draws in too many bugs, especially in summer. We get these things called Christmas beetles when the weather gets warm. They're about the size of your thumbnail, and they're stupid as hell. If you leave a light on at night, they come in scores, bumping into you like drunks at a crowded nightclub. I keep a little citronella candle instead to shoo the mozzies. Then I turn on a bright spotlight round the other side of the house to lure the beetles away from the back deck. Well, last week on Monday, I was out maybe around 10:30 at night, just doing my usual. Everything was fine until suddenly the spotlight on the other side of the house goes out. I groaned aloud. I had a spare bulb in the house, but the whole thing was an inconvenience more than anything. Anyway, I went and got the spare bulb, walked round the other side of the house to the light and, well, the bulb wasn't blowing. It was gone. Unscrewed and nowhere to be seen. Looking around, I heard a weird sort of scraping sound from nearby, like two rocks rubbing together. It started slow and picked up speed, moving fast towards me. I didn't stop to think about it. I just made a beeline for the door and got into the house. Bugger that for a game of soldiers. I locked my door and spent a good 10 minutes just cussing out and turning on every light in the house. I called the cops and told them someone was on my property, but they figured it was probably just some local kids pulling a prank on me. They agreed to send someone out, but they weren't in any hurry. My part of town was pretty quiet. Nothing really happens here. It's lonely, out of the way, peaceful, Exactly the kind of place I thought I wanted to live. Well, I was having second thoughts, I can tell you that. I couldn't sleep much, even though I was pretty sure the cops wouldn't come till morning. Every time I dozed off, I'd hear that scraping stone sound. I told myself it was a stick falling from a tree, or an animal. Maybe just shifting boards in the house. But it was definitely stone. Stone rubbing on stone. I peeked out the window a few times to see if I could see anything, but that was pretty fruitless. A couple of times I thought I saw something, like a couple of eyes moving around. But eyes aren't anything out of the ordinary in the bush. Animals, I thought aloud. Just wallabies or something. Cops showed up the next morning about 9 to ask about the night before. Gave me a good fright when he knocked at the door and woke me up. But I was sure as hell glad to see the sun outside my window. He was an Aboriginal fella named Cohen. I knew him from around town, and he was a nice enough bloke. Always gave a smile and g'day when I passed him on the street. We checked out the spotlight. Bulb missing, no footprints or anything weird. No idea where the bulb went. He reckoned it was weird that it wasn't dropped and smashed right under the fitting. Lights like that get bloody hot. You don't even think about handling them unless they've been turned off for a good while. Not without oven mitts or something on your hands. What kind of teenage vandal carries oven mitts? Anyway, when I got to the sound I heard, the scraping stones, he didn't laugh it off the way I tried to. In fact, he looked pretty bloody serious. Malingi, he said under his breath. Malingi? What the arse is a malingi? I asked. Old kid's story. Black fella's been trying to scare kids and keep them from wandering the bush as long as your mob. Longer, probably. Cohen smiled. So how does the story go? I asked, more curious than concerned. Well, the Malingi is a tall fella. His skin's hard like rock. His legs and arms are bandy like makes him walk all funny, so his knees knock and scrape together when he steps, Cohen explained. He didn't take what he was saying too seriously though. He was explaining a kid's story. He usually doesn't cause much trouble, not if you get out of the way when you hear the scrapes. But if you don't, well, he ain't all too friendly either. That's all? I asked, managing to laugh now at what was obviously a bit of a folklore. Well, that's most of it. Auntie says he's got red eyes that you can always see, like fire, and he don't like bright lights all too much. Cohen let out a bally laugh. Don't reckon you pissed off an old Malingi with your spotlight, do you? Seems less than likely, I said, smiling as I walked Cohen to his car. I said goodbye and waved him off as he drove away. I felt better after talking to someone. Being alone too much really screws with your head, especially if you don't live in eyeshot of neighbours. It's pretty easy to feel vulnerable on your own. I spent the rest of the day working from home, got some shopping done and the rest. I replaced the bulb, but decided not to sit outside that night, so I kept it off. Passed the next few days mostly the same way. Nothing too weird to report there. Some nights I thought I heard a scrape. Thought I saw some eyes out there too. Didn't think too much of it though. It's easy to build things up in your head when you've got a fright. Best not to think about it. I kept inside at night till Saturday, 5 days after the incident with the light. Figured I should stop being such an idiot and make use of my deck again. So that night I was sitting out, about the same time, 10:30, having a smoke and editing some stuff I'd written for a job I took. I fixed the spotlight so that it was on around the corner, keeping the beetles at bay. And I had my little citronella candle to shoo the mozzies. I was feeling pretty fine, till I heard the bulb smash. Light round the side suddenly went dark. It was quiet for a moment, but then the night erupted with this gravelly scream that sounded nothing like I'd ever heard. That was no bloody teenager. I turned toward the house and the sound came, the scraping stone. Slow at first, but picking up speed and hurrying fast around the house toward me. I bolted for the back door and pretty much jumped through as I slammed it behind me. I hardly had time to latch it before the handle began to shake and that goddamn stone scratching was just outside. It must have been smart though, because as soon as it realised the door was locked, it moved toward a window. I stood still. It didn't follow me inside last time, but looking at that window and seeing its face stoop down and smile that lipless, toothy grin at me, well, it put the fear of God in me there and then. The smug bastard didn't hesitate to smash the glass out and reach inside. I didn't really have time to react. I grabbed at my keys, but by the time I turned to make for the front door, it had already half clambered into the house. He was a lanky bastard, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, spindly and long-limbed. It looked almost spider-like, with its limbs oddly folding through the window. The skin looked black, or maybe like stone, but those big-ass red eyes were all I had time to take in properly before I got the hell out of Dodge. Sure as anything, those were the eyes I'd been seeing out my window. Those eyes looked pissed. It screamed horribly and swung its arms at me as I ran for the front door, bursting into the night and slamming it behind me. I was glad I never bothered to park my car inside the garage. Just the thought of having to take the time to open it up was making me piss myself. I pull open the door to my Nissan Patrol, fall in, and just as I start the engine, the front door bursts open in splinters as that god-awful Malingi barrels out into the night. That smile, that sickeningly wide smile it made as it lurched toward me on all fours. The scrape of stone on stone as its knees clicked together. I have no idea how I made it into town without flipping my car. I drove faster that night than I ever have driven in my life. As of now, I'm looking to move into the city. Whoever buys my old house can have whatever I left behind. I sure as hell don't want to go get it. Got a call from my friend this morning too. Wants me to go camping in the bush. Bugger that.